Mist hovered above the Indus River, pale and patient, drifting inland as if guided by memory rather than wind. It slipped between brick walls laid generations ago by hands long turned to dust. The streets of Mohenjo-daro accepted the morning without urgency. They had learned, over centuries, that nothing important needed to rush. Water murmured beneath the ground, hidden in channels carved with precision and care. It flowed where it was told, obeying slopes calculated not by rulers but by quiet minds who believed that harmony mattered more than grandeur. Above it, the city rested balanced, measured, and strangely humble for something so advanced. Rue stepped outside his home just as the first light touched the eastern horizon. He did not wear shoes. He never did at dawn. The cool brick beneath his feet reminded him that the city was real, solid, alive. Each step carried the memory of those who had shaped these streets long before he was born. He inhaled deeply. The air smelled of damp earth, baked clay, and distant smoke from early hearths. Somewhere nearby, a door creaked open. A woman began sweeping her threshold, pushing yesterday's dust into the street where it would be carried away by the wind or washed into the drains when water flowed again. She did not look up, but her movements were calm, practiced, unburdened by fear. Rue walked on. The city revealed itself piece by piece. Straight streets met at careful angles, guiding the eye forward rather than upward. Homes stood close together, similar in size, built from the same bricks. As if the city itself had decided that no one life was meant to rise far above another. Children's laughter floated briefly through the air, sharp and bright, then faded as they disappeared into courtyards. Somewhere, a potter's wheel began to turn. Grain poured into storage bins with a sound like rain. These were the noises of a city at peace with itself. Rue passed traders arranging goods, beads of carnelian, shells brought from distant coasts, finely measured weights placed gently on cloth, seals hung from cords around their necks, each one engraved with symbols no one outside the valley could read. They were not signatures of power. They were promises of trust. No guards stood watch. No banners marked authority. No king waited to be obeyed. The city did not need them. As Rue walked, his hand brushed the wall of a house, feeling the slight unevenness where brick met mortar. He remembered helping lay similar bricks years ago, adjusting them until water would flow correctly beneath. He had been younger then, his hands steadier, his confidence untested by doubt. He reached the great bath as the sun finally broke free of the horizon. Light spilled across the water, turning its surface into a mirror that caught the sky and held it still. The bath sat lower than the surrounding buildings, as if bowing to the earth. Steps descended into it from both sides, worn smooth by countless feet. Rue stood at the edge and looked down, his reflection wavering gently. This place mattered, not because gods demanded it, but because people did. Clean water here was not a luxury reserved for the powerful. It was shared, respected, protected. Rituals happened here. Yes, but so did laughter, conversation, and quiet reflection. Rue knelt and dipped his fingers into the water. Cool, steady, reliable. He let himself believe, for a moment, that it always would be. As the day unfolded, the city filled with movement. Shadows shortened. Voices grew louder but never harsh. Food was prepared. Trades were made. Life continued in the way it always had, without spectacle, without conquest, without fear. Yet even in this perfection, something stirred beneath Rue's calm. It was not a sound, not a sight, just a feeling, faint but persistent, like a memory that didn't belong to him. He noticed it when he paused too long, listening to the drains beneath his feet. The water still flowed, but its voice seemed thinner somehow, less certain. He dismissed the thought, telling himself that cities changed moods just like people. Still, the thought returned as he walked home later, as the sun leaned westward and painted the bricks in gold. Everything here felt permanent because it had always been, in that, he realized, without knowing why, was what made it fragile. As evening settled over Mohenjo-daro, lamps flickered on one by one. The city glowed softly, not blazing, not demanding attention. Rue stood in his doorway and looked back at the streets stretching out before him, orderly.com, beautiful in their restraint. He did not know that one day, people would search for this place beneath layers of earth and time. He did not know that its silence would confuse and fascinate them. All he knew was that he loved this city. And sometimes, love is what makes loss hurt before it even arrives. The night deepened, the river flowed on, and the city slept in a way that its greatest story had already begun. Please like, share, and subscribe my channel. It simply arrived each morning a little quieter than the day before, its surface less eager to catch the light. The people of Mohenjo-daro had lived beside water for generations. They knew its moods, its patience, its occasional anger. They trusted it the way one trusts breath without thinking, without fear. At first, The change felt imagined. Rue noticed it while washing his hands at dawn. The water felt warmer than it should have, lacking the sharp coolness that once woke his senses. He held his palms together beneath the stream longer than usual, waiting for the familiar chill. It did not come. He told himself it was the season. Seasons shifted. They always had. As he walked through the city that morning, everything appeared unchanged. Doors opened, smoke rose, children ran, the drains still carried water away with quiet obedience. If the city had a pulse, it remained steady. And yet, Rue felt as though he were listening to a familiar song played at a slower tempo, notes stretched thin. He stopped near a well where two women waited with clay jars. Their conversation drifted toward him, casual and untroubled. "The bucket takes longer now," one said lightly. "Yes," the other replied, adjusting her grip. "But it always does before the rains." They laughed softly, and the sound eased something tight in Rue's chest. He moved on, ashamed of his unease. By midday, the heat settled heavier than usual. The sun pressed down, not cruelly, but insistently. Shadows shrank, clinging close to walls as if seeking protection. Rue passed fields at the edge of the city where young shoots pushed through soil that looked paler than it had weeks ago. He knelt and pressed his fingers into the earth. It crumbled to his... That evening, elders gathered near the granaries, sitting on low platforms worn smooth by time. Ju joined them quietly, listening more than speaking. They discussed trade routes, distant cities, the steady rhythm of exchange that had bound their world together for centuries. One elder spoke of a caravan delayed farther north. Another mentioned a river branch that no longer flowed as strongly as before. "Rivers wander," an older voice said gently. "They always return." Heads nodded. The matter settled itself in shared certainty. Rue said nothing. Night came with unusual stillness. The insects sang, but not as loudly. The wind arrived late and left early. As Rue lay on his mat, he stared into darkness, listening for the sound of water beneath the city. It was there but faint, like someone speaking through a wall. Days passed, then weeks. Change crept in quietly, respectful of habit. A trader packed his goods earlier than usual, explaining he wished to visit relatives until the next season. A family closed their doors one morning and did not open them again. Their home remained, but their voices did not. No one panicked. No one needed to. Mohenjo-daro had always endured. Still, Rue began to notice how often people looked toward the river now, how conversations paused when someone mentioned water. Wells were shared more carefully. Baths were used less often, their great stone steps echoing slightly louder with each footfall. One afternoon, Rue stood at the great bath and watched sunlight dance across its surface. The water level sat lower, exposing stones that had not seen air in years. Children no longer splashed at the edges. Adults spoke in hushed tones, as if the place had become fragile. He knelt again, pressing his palm against the stone. It felt warm that night. The wind came hard and dry, carrying dust instead of cool relief. It slipped into homes, settling on sleeping faces, coating floors. Rue woke, coughing, his throat raw. Outside, the city felt unsettled, restless in a way he had never known. In the days that followed, the birds began to leave. They did not vanish all at once, they simply failed to return. Nests sat empty. The sky felt larger, quieter. Rue watched one morning as a flock rose, circled once, and disappeared toward the horizon without hesitation. He felt something break inside him, then not loudly, not completely, but enough to leave a crack. The elders met again. Their voices were slower now, measured. "The rains will come," one said. "They always do," another replied, though his eyes lingered on the ground. Rue finally spoke. "What if they do not?" The question hung between them, heavy and unwelcome. Silence answered him. No one accused him of fear. No one dismissed him outright. They simply did not know how to respond. To imagine a world without the river was to imagine a body without blood. The city began to thin at its edges. Homes stood closed, dust gathering in doorways. Footsteps echoed longer on certain streets. The market still functioned, but fewer voices filled the air. Laughter, once constant, appeared in brief flashes before fading again. Drew helped where he could. He adjusted channels, measured slopes, tried to coax water where it no longer wished to go. He worked until his hands ached, until sweat blurred his vision. But water obeys nature, not hope. One evening, as the sun sank low and red, Rue walked to the riverbank alone. The river flowed on, indifferent and tired. He knelt and dipped his hands into it again. The water felt thin. He let it slip through his fingers and realized, with a clarity that frightened him, that nothing was broken in the way people understood breakage. There was no disaster, no enemy, no single moment to blame, only time. The city still stood. The bricks still held. The drains still worked. but something essential, something invisible was withdrawing, slowly and without cruelty. As darkness fell, lamps flickered on across Mohenjo-Daro, fewer than before. Rue stood and looked back toward the city, its straight streets glowing softly against the night. For the first time, he wondered not how to save it but how to say goodbye. The thought did not bring panic, it brought grief. And in that grief he understood something the city had never needed him to know before. Not all endings arrive as storms. Some come like a long exhale, quiet enough to be missed, heavy enough to change everything. Please like, share and subscribe my channel. At first it appeared as absence rather than movement. Doors that stayed closed longer than usual. Fires that were not lit at dusk. Courtyards where footsteps no longer crossed the same familiar paths. Mohenjo-Daro still stood in perfect lines and measured angles, but something essential had begun to loosen, like a thread quietly pulled from cloth. Rue noticed it in the mornings. He would step into the street expecting the gentle disorder of daily life, voices overlapping, children calling to one another, traders arguing lightly over weights. Instead, there were pauses where sound should have been. The city still breathed, but its breath had grown shallow. One morning he passed a house where a family had lived for as long as he could remember. The door was sealed with mud, carefully smoothed, respectful. No sign of struggle, no sign of haste. Just a final, deliberate act of closure. Rue stopped and placed his hand against the wall, as if expecting warmth from within. There was none. He walked on his steps slower than before. People spoke less now. Conversations ended sooner. Eyes lingered on the river, on the sky, on the horizon. Everyone was listening for something, rain, perhaps, or certainty. Neither arrived. When the decision to leave finally settled over the city, it did not arrive as an order. There was no voice that commanded it, no council that announced it. It spread instead through quiet understanding, passing from one household to another like a shared grief that needed no explanation. Rue stood in the market one afternoon and watched a trader pack his remaining goods. Beads were wrapped in cloth, weights placed gently into a basket. The man moved slowly, reverently, as though each object deserved thanks. "You're going far?" Rue asked. The trader nodded once. "Where the water still remembers us." There was no bitterness in his voice, only acceptance. That night, Rue walked through the city under a sky heavy with stars. The lamps burned lower now, fewer in number, their light swallowed quickly by darkness. The streets echoed faintly, each footstep sounding louder than it should have. He found himself standing before the great bath without remembering how he had arrived. The water was gone. Dust coated the stone floor, softening its edges. The steps descended into emptiness, their familiar curve leading nowhere. Rue sat at the edge and let his feet rest on the first step, remembering the weight of water against his skin, the way voices once echoed here, layered and alive. This place had held so much of them. Not power, not fear, just presence. He closed his eyes and listened. The city answered with silence. Days passed, and the movement became visible. Families gathered what they could carry, tools wrapped in cloth, seals tucked away carefully, as if symbols could preserve memory. Some paused to mark their doorways, pressing signs into soft clay, leaving messages no one might ever read. Children asked questions adults could not answer. Where were they going? When would they return? Why could they not stay? Rue watched a mother lift her child onto her hip and whisper something he could not hear. The child stopped asking. He helped where he could, though he did not know how to help a city let go of itself. He walked the drains one last time, checking slopes, clearing blockages that no longer mattered. Water still moved beneath the ground, thinner now, uncertain, as if confused by the sudden lack of purpose. One morning he found the elders gathered again. Their faces looked older than they had weeks before, lines etched deeper by choice rather than age. "It is time," one said softly. No one argued. They spoke of roots, of lands beyond the river where water still flowed strong. They spoke of carrying knowledge rather than walls, memory rather than bricks. They spoke of beginning again without calling it loss. Rue listened, feeling both proud and hollow. The final dawn came quietly. Mist rose from the river as it always had, as if unaware of what it was taking with it. The city stirred, not into life, but into departure. Bundles rested by doorways. Carts creaked under unfamiliar weight. Footsteps gathered and moved outward, toward paths worn thin by hesitation. Rue took one last walk alone. He traced familiar streets with his eyes, memorizing angles and distances he would never walk again. He touched walls that had sheltered generations. He paused where children once played, where laughter had bounced between bricks. At the edge of the city, he stopped and turned. Mohenjo-Daro stood behind him whole, intact, silent. No smoke rose from its hearths, no voices called his name. The city did not beg to be remembered. It did not demand grief. It simply remained, dignified even in abandonment. Rue felt tears gather, not from despair, but from gratitude. They had built something rare here, something gentle, something that did not need conquest to prove its worth. When he finally turned away, the wind moved through the empty streets, carrying dust where footsteps had been. Doors creaked softly, opening and closing as if unsure whether to wait or to follow. Civilizations are often remembered for how they fall. This one shows how it left. As the people disappeared into the distance, the city began its long sleep. Sand drifted in. Silence settled deep into stone. Time, patient and unhurried, prepared to cover what it could not erase. And somewhere beneath the fading sky, Mohenjo-daro stood alone, not defeated, not destroyed, only quiet. Please like, share and subscribe my channel. First came the sand, patient and light, carried by winds that no longer brought rain. It settled into corners, along thresholds, inside rooms where families once slept side by side. Then came silence, not frightening, but complete. The kind of silence that does not argue with memory, only waits for it to fade. Mohenjo-daro remained standing long after its people were gone. The bricks held, the streets kept their lines. Drains still rested beneath the earth, empty but intact, like veins in a body that had gently stopped breathing. The river moved farther away, choosing new paths, forgetting names but not gravity. Seasons passed, then centuries, then more. Grass tried to grow and failed. Dust returned again and again. The sky watched without judgment. And still, the city endured. Far beyond its walls, generations rose and fell. Empires were born loud and died loudly. Kings carved their names into stone. Armies marched. Fires burned. Stories were shouted, rewritten, forgotten. The world grew faster, harsher, louder. The city beneath the sand remained quiet. One day long after Rue's name had dissolved into time, hands touched the bricks again. Careful hands, they brushed away earth gently, as if afraid the city might wake. Fingers traced straight streets with wonder, following lines no one alive had ever walked. Eyes widened at drains placed with mathematical precision, at homes built not for display but for living. No palace was found, no throne, no temple rising above the rest, only balance. Those who uncovered the city spoke softly, as if sound itself might disturb something sacred. They wondered who had ruled here. They searched for signs of power and found none. They asked how a civilization so advanced could exist without kings, without monuments to conquest. The city did not answer. It never needed to. What it offered instead was evidence, quiet, undeniable proof that once, humanity chose another way. That once, a people built not to dominate, but to belong. That intelligence did not always wear a crown. That greatness could exist without cruelty. They found seals etched with symbols still undeciphered, their meanings locked behind time. They found tools worn smooth by honest work. They found children's toys abandoned mid-play, frozen in the moment of leaving. And in those small things, the city spoke louder than any statue. It said, "We were here." It said, "We lived well." It said, "We did not destroy ourselves." As knowledge spread, the city's name returned to human mouths. Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, Indus Valley. Words that tried to hold something too vast and too gentle to be contained. Yet even as it was studied, measured, and documented, the city remained distant. It resisted ownership. It refused to be claimed by any one story, because it belonged to everyone. Now, as you listen here, in a world filled with noise, you are closer to it than you think. When water runs beneath your streets, you echo their wisdom. When cities plan for people instead of power, you remember them. When you feel tired of chaos and long for balance, you hear their voice. They did not leave behind written histories to glorify themselves. They left behind a question instead. What kind of world do we want to build? As your breathing slows, as your eyes grow heavy, imagine the city as it once was. Streets warm under the sun, water moving gently beneath stone, laughter without fear, lives without rulers towering above them. Then imagine it sleeping again, peaceful, intact, waiting beneath the earth. Civilizations do not truly disappear when their values survive. Cities do not truly die when their ideas remain alive. Tonight, as you rest, know this. Once, long before us, humanity built a place that believed harmony was enough. And somewhere deep beneath the ground, it still rests, not lost, not broken, just quiet, waiting to be remembered. Please like, share, and subscribe my channel.